think I look a little better without the beard. What do you guys think? That was a very recent change, not in time for this. Thank you for inviting me to Vancouver Film School's Game Design Expo. I'm very grateful to be here and very grateful to be recognized and honored by both the invitation and the presence of everybody here who has come to hear myself and all the other wonderful speakers talk about things that we dearly love and that we enjoy spending all of our time making and creating so that all of you can hopefully enjoy it as much as we liked making it. Let me get that off the screen for you. There we go. I don't look like that either, by the way, in case anybody was curious. So I'm here to talk about Radiant Story. Radiant Story is a system that, or actually it's a name for a system of designing content that we use at Bethesda Softworks and created for the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. And it's kind of an evolution of things that we've been working on over the last few projects, and we hope to continue to develop it as time goes on. So the main question that we start with something like this, because you don't know all the details about how it works or what it is what exactly were we trying to accomplish with Radiant Story? What was the point of having this system, and what was it going to do to improve the game experience that all of you are going to possibly have? And this is a diagram that Todd Howard, game director for the studio, put up for us in the very, very early days. And this kind of drove a lot of what we were looking at and focusing on and talking about for the next year or so. In the center of this diagram is the player. And the way he described this, that's what the early games, say Daggerfall and Arena Age, for those of you who remember games back that far. The game was about the player. The game only understood the player. That's the only thing they had available to understand is what the technology could support at the time. Then as games got more sophisticated, Morrowind and Oblivion, the player was understood by and understood other objects in the world. Those are the lines radiating out from the player. And what he wanted us to do, the challenge that he put before us, was to make the rest of the world understand itself in the context of the player. The player is still the centerpiece here. He's still in that middle of that diagram. But now all the pieces need to understand themselves in relationship to the player. And we didn't know how we were going to do this, but this is what he put forward to us. This was a challenge, and this is what we spent the next couple months trying to figure out. How the heck are we going to do this? Because really, it hadn't really been done before. So what we were trying to do with this was make the world feel more responsive. So based on that diagram, we were looking at making sure that all these pieces of the world that would understand themselves and understand the player would respond to the player. So responsive has to be in reaction to the player. It's not just in reaction to other actors, although that's also part of it. It has to be in response to the player. And then there's menial stuff that we wanted to make sure. We had faction lines that we were going to do. In Oblivion, we had the Fighters Guild and we had the Mages Guild, and we wanted to be able to provide extra quest material, extra adventuring for the player to have. And we didn't have anything like that in any of those games. Either Fallout or Oblivion did not have that, and that's kind of a staple in a lot of other games. So this is an area we thought, hey, we should really start to provide some of this material. And this to me was one of the big ones. We wanted it to adapt to the player's situation and to adapt to the player himself. So as the player starts engaging in the world, he starts accomplishing things, he starts changing the world a little bit, we wanted to make sure that the game would adapt to that situation, that it would respond to him, which is the first point up there. And therefore, the player feels like he's a part of the world and not like he's just moving through a painting that's a still life. And the last thing is we wanted to allow NPCs to change roles. This is somewhat unique to our environment because our actors, our NPCs, tend to get stuck in one role, and then when you're done with them, you have no use for them anymore. This was the model that Oblivion ran on. So you'd approach a character, he might give you a quest, you do that quest for him, and then you're done with him. We might as well pull him from the stage, but we keep him around because we like the landscape to have the extra actors in there. So there's this sense of disposableness to the actors. But if the actors can change roles, that would allow us to accomplish several things. First of all, that character might have a new role later on, something else that he could do, something else he might participate in. Secondly, if the player is interacting with the world, circumstances might change the nature of what he would or would not do. He might no longer have this role, even though you may not have experienced it yet. He might switch over to this other role, and the world will feel more organic. So what does that really mean? I mean, that's a lot of highfalutin philosophy there. You know, we were talking a lot of highfalutin philosophy at that time. That's what happens in early project discussions, and you feel really good about yourself and how proud you are about your philosophy, and you haven't done a damn thing to make a game yet. You're just talking to yourself. So you have to start getting down to brass tacks. What does all this mean? And this is what Todd said to us. First thing, hey, I like that responsive part. Can you give me some examples of what that means? One of the things Todd's very good at is cutting down to the nitty-gritty and what's really important in actually making a game. So we really appreciated that. So he's like, yeah, you kill a guy, and his family goes, races out and attacks you. Okay. So I killed this other guy over here, and they sent me a thank you note saying, you know, I always wanted to kill that guy anyway because he was my enemy. Okay. So I kill this guy, and this is what Todd started saying. And, you know, he's 100% right. You know, we tend to focus on the violence in combat in games, frequently to the detriment of the product, quite frankly. But it is still a staple. But we needed something that wasn't about killing somebody. What does responsiveness mean if it isn't about the combat side of the game? Well, that was my answer, by the way. I had nothing. I had absolutely nothing. You know, I kind of stared at him like a dead fish going, okay, I'll get back to you on that. So we did get back to him on that. And the first thing that we did was we looked at what does responsive mean? The actual word implies that there is an event that you're responding to. So what are events? Fortunately, in the world of video games, events are fairly easy to list and categorize. There's an actual limited number of them. In the real world, there is not. There is an unlimited number of events because the real world doesn't have the limitations of a video game. So we just started listing everything that the player could do, literally listed every action. And then we called some of the silly ones out. You know, yeah, I can go into sneak mode. Yeah, okay, I don't want the world to respond to that. That's okay. It doesn't need to respond to that in this system. We'll have other things it can respond to with that. And this is kind of the list that we came up with of events that you might actually reasonably want to respond to. And these are not all equal. And not all of them actually got implemented in the game with activities. But this is kind of the fat list of things that we had. So you notice at the top of the list up there, all the combat stuff, because that was the easy stuff. You know, low-hanging fruit, you just grab a hold of and throw up there. And although they're not sorted in order, they kind of generally go down to the stuff at the bottom where it's like weird stuff that might happen to you. So there are some very interesting things on here, and it started to come through. What would people in the world react to if I, as the player, did it? You know, would they react to me buying an item? Yeah, maybe. That one's a little weak, but you could do something like that. Would they react to me dropping an item? Yeah, okay, there's some cool stuff we might be able to do with that. And so we started from this list to form lists of what the possible responses might be to those events. And that's the responsiveness that we were looking for. So let me give you an example of an event-based quest for us. Before I go into that, though, when I use the word quest here, it's almost kind of an internal technical term because a quest is an actual object in our construction set. And being an object, it's easy for us to say we're going to start a quest. From a player's perspective, a quest is an adventuring activity he'll take part in. That's not necessarily all the uses of the object quest in our editor. So for us, a quest is something that contains dialogue and scripting and actions and things like that, but they're not always visible to the player. So some of these quests may not feel like they're actually traditional, hey, go do this for me kind of quest. But remember, we weren't looking for that. We were looking to respond to the player. Sometimes that would create an adventure, and sometimes it wouldn't. So here's a simple one. Learn a spell. Notice I start off with something that was not killing a guy. So when the player learns a spell, a wizard student might appear and ask to be taught that spell. So that's one example of responding to something that happens in the world. The player did something or accomplished something, and the world responds to it. If you buy an item, an actor or an NPC might claim it was stolen and ask for it back. So you buy an item, you leave the store, some guy walks up to you and says, "You just bought that off that guy. That was mine, I want it back." Now, for story reasons, we ended up not actually implementing that particular one because it didn't feel good anytime it was played. You always ended up just killing the guy who was demanding his item back because, damn it, you bought that item. You weren't gonna give it back to him. So it didn't turn out to be something that was fun. And that was actually key here also. Just because an event existed, and just because a response would be reasonable in the real world, didn't necessarily mean it was good for a game. Those are two very, very different things. And it was important to understand that. Making a potion, the actor walks up to you and asks you to make a healing potion for them. Now, so far, these three all have something in common. I do something, and an actor in the world approaches me. So we don't necessarily want to limit ourselves to that kind of thing either. So this is one that anybody who's played Skyrim sees a lot, I'm sure. You kill a dragon, and people start coming out of the woodwork to talk about it. Nobody approached you, but the actors in the world are responding to the event. And it feels really good. It feels like the world is responding. It feels like these actors are real. Because if you look back at games 5 and 10 years ago, you would do something, and all the other actors in the world just walk around like nothing happened. You know, just killed a dragon. Yep, there's a body. Not even going to look at it, just going to walk right on by. So we wanted them to have that kind of responsiveness. And that one obviously did get implemented. This one also is a good one, because this one isn't necessarily just a dialogue kind of thing. This actually turns into a little bit of adventure, which we also wanted to make sure happened with these Radiant stories. You steal an item, and at some point in the world, a little ways down the road time-wise, some thugs come and attack you. And after you kill them, there's notes on them that say that they've been told to do this because you stole an item. So it feels like the world is responding, once again, to the things that you do. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we wanted. This is exactly the kind of end result that we were looking for. So how do you build Radiant stories? Now, after we had all our good examples, then it actually came down to what do we do? Well, in order to do it, we needed to create a tremendous amount of data. Data, data, data. So we needed new object types to define what a location was and what character relationships are. My very, very first example, which is actually still a good one, even though Todd made a little fun of us for focusing on killing a guy. I kill a guy, and his family comes and seeks me out. How does the game know who's the family? And if these guys are going to talk to me, even if it's just combat lines, you know, "Hey, you killed my brother," how does he know it's his brother as opposed to some anonymous family member? Because we don't want just, "You killed my family member." That's not immersive. That feels very gamey. We didn't want anything like that. So we had to build new data types that would define relationships, and that data needed to be accessible in the quest system so that it could find it. So in terms of brass tacks for that kill quest, what happens is the kill event is processed. It then goes and has to find a relative. So it has to search through the actors in the world, looking at this relationship data type, find someone who matches the conditions that the quest requires, and then allow them to participate in this quest. Location ref types for bosses, boss chests, captives, quest objects, all kinds of things. Once again, data, data, data. The real world, we have all this data in our heads and we manage it seamlessly. A video game does not understand a relationship unless you build that. It doesn't know that this actor is a boss unless you tell it. It doesn't know that a captive can be held in this place unless you mark that data that way. So we had to create a whole bunch of new data types, and we had to add this data to objects in the game. That's a pretty Herculean task at the end of the day. One of the main things that we used, and this isn't new, these have been around for years and years and years, we invented a keyword object type. Keyword object type would allow us to identify any particular object as belonging to a class by putting that keyword for that class on it. And then we would know that it belongs to it and we could process that information and use it in the quest. Now, I probably should have said this a little earlier, but I'll say this right now. Everything that I'm talking about is stuff that you would find out very easily looking at our construction set. So when it's released, I'm not giving away any secrets here. This stuff is all completely exposed in our construction set. It's all stuff that you guys, if you choose to use that and make your own mods, will be able to do on your own. I'm just kind of giving you a sneak peek of it a little bit. So we had keywords for what kind of a dungeon was it, so that I could send somebody to a bandit dungeon or to a Draugr dungeon. I would know that's the dungeon they were being sent to. I could tell that someone was a shopkeeper because I put that keyword on them, so they belonged to that class. So if I have to look through the world for an innkeeper, I could find one. Locations, we already mentioned that one. We even did things like personality. You know, is this a grumpy person? Is this a happy person? Does this guy side with the Stormcloaks? Does this guy side with the Imperials? You know, is he rich? Is he poor? Is he likely to be generous? Is he likely to be someone who's a mercenary? And we could look for people who had those personality traits as well, if necessary. And definitely not least, was an alias system for quests. I'll be getting to that in the next slide a little bit. But the alias system allowed us to put people into a role temporarily, which was not something we had done before. When we had someone in a role in previous games, they were permanently in that role. We couldn't move them in and out of a role in order to take advantage of things. And then the most important thing, which I've already talked about quite a bit, is events in the story manager. The story manager was the system that processes the events. So when an event is created, the story manager finds that event, or the event finds the story manager. You have to ask the programmers which order that goes in. And it filters through a whole list of possibilities and says, this event fits these criterion, so I can kick off this responsive quest. So the story manager managed all of that data. Aliases. This turned out to be a really big win for us. The keywords were too, but the aliases we ended up using tremendously. And once you see the construction set, you'll see that they're everywhere. So, shopkeepers and aliases can be replaced if the player kills or removes them. This isn't something you see a lot, but it is built in everywhere in the game. And it was our first example of being able to swap actors in and out of an alias. So for those of you who've played Skyrim, if you go into Riverwood, one of the first quests that you might run into is Lucan and Camilla, and they run the shop in Riverwood. And Lucan's complaining somebody stole his golden claw. Okay, that's cool. Go ahead and kill Lucan. Is quest over? In previous games, we would either have to say you cannot kill Lucan, or the quest is over. It's canceled and it's dead and done and gone. We really hate doing that. We really do not like canceling quests. So the alias system allowed us to move Camilla into the alias as the quest giver for this quest, should Lucan be dead. And we didn't worry about why. We'd let other systems take care of the why. But he's gone for some reason. Now Camilla's the quest giver. And she automatically gets slotted in to all the activities, all the roles, all the scripts, all the dialogue, etc. that he had. Now obviously we'd write custom lines for her because her line should express differently than his, and it'd be a little weird if she started talking in this deep male voice, but but what it gave us the advantage is we didn't have to write and do the logic for all the things she'd have to do should he be killed. It could be automatic. And that was a very, very powerful metaphor for us. So aliases can be filled when the quest starts, that story manager that I just spoke of. When the quest kicks off, it fills the aliases that it's going to need. Everything in the quest needs to be an alias. There's a couple exceptions for that, but none that I'm going to go into here. But everything gets filled into an alias. And then if necessary, or if we desire, we can randomly choose some things. Now we ended up dialing back from this quite a bit in the end. But so we can choose a random dungeon, we can choose a random reward, we can choose a random actor, we can choose a random location, and we can put conditions on that randomness to make sure that it fit what we wanted. The random location could be within a certain distance, or it could be of a certain type, which in the parlance that I just was speaking of, would mean it had a particular keyword attached to it. And that allowed us to build things that were somewhat randomized, but still felt like they had purpose and intent and fit what was going on. And this was an important issue for us also. Aliases hold data that is released when the quest completes. In previous versions of our games, if an actor was doing a certain thing, he was always a part of that. That data never went away. Here, we could release it, and it was gone, and then that actor could be used for something else if we chose later on. Now, a lot of this led to something that we called world interactions. It's just an internal term for a momentary thing where the world interacts with or reacts to the things that the player does. So you're interacting with the world and it reacts. And these were some of the things that we found worked the best and really made things come alive. And many of them turned out to be very small. They didn't have to be huge, grandiose things where the entire world turns over because you slew the Jarl or something like that. They could be smaller things. So I'm going to build an example interaction in a minute, but aliases, item, bodyguards, and item, bystanders, and guard. So for this particular world interaction, hold on a second here. There we go. So we have an item, we have bystanders, we have a guard. Those are the aliases I'm going to need. This particular world interaction is going to be for having dropped an item in the world. So I drop an item in the world. Say, drop the Mace of Molag Bal. Don't ask me why I'm dropping the Mace of Molag Bal, but I chose to drop the Mace of Molag Bal. So for this one, the item is defined by the event. The event passes that item into it, so I know what the item is. The bystanders and the guards are halfway sought in the list of objects in the world. So 2 nearby bystanders are required. If I can't find 2 nearby bystanders, it shuts down. If I find 2 nearby bystanders, it keeps going. 3 more and the guard are optional. So if I find them, it's cool. If I don't, it's also cool. Not a big deal. So the action then is going to be that the 2 bystanders begin to fight over the item, and those optional bystanders and the guard will stand around and gawk about it. Now this was kind of a medium side in terms of the scale of the reaction, because it's kind of a big deal. You drop an item and suddenly half the town comes over and starts arguing about it. But it's kind of cool. I hadn't seen games before where if I drop an item on the ground, there was a dramatic reaction to that. That's something that was kind of new and fresh. Plenty of games, you drop an item on the ground, somebody might throw a line at you. But now where they actually react and interact with the object that you dropped on the ground like that. Now, it's really, really easy to go too far with this kind of thing. It's very, very simple. It's very easy to have that happen. You get all excited. And you start making too much of this content that uses these aliases and this randomization. This is an offhand comment that our game director, Todd Howard, made. He wasn't being serious at the time, but it kind of illustrates the kind of thinking that you can fall into if you're not careful. You know, what if the entire main quest is just one big radiant thing? It's just completely responsive only to what the player did. Sounds great, really big philosophical moment. It would play horribly. It's not what you would actually want to play. This is my own little faux pas. I was a little more serious about this than Todd was about the above line at the time. You know, the companion's quest line should be nothing but radiant quests. That turns out not to be as good an idea either. We were taking the idea and we were pushing it too far. We were so excited by the potential of it, we were using it too much. But this is important. If you don't end up going too far, you're not stretching yourself as a game developer. You have to do that. In sports, frequently, for football, for example, they'll say if the team isn't getting any penalties, they're not playing hard enough. You have to be pushing that boundary. If you're not pushing the boundary, you're not going to make the best game you can make. But the complement to this is you've got to know when you've gone too far. It's just as important. If you can't recognize It'll be an after-the-fact recognition. If you can't recognize when you've gone too far, then you're going to put things into your game that are just bad. It's bad content. You don't want it there. The audience isn't going to want it there. So you've got to try. You've got to keep pushing, and then you'll hopefully recognize, okay, I went too far, and you dial it back a little bit. This is an important aspect of iteration in game design. So, some other examples for us. The road to Sovngarde is paved with good intentions. When we started actually implementing these things, some things got revealed. In particular, we found that some of the radiant quests were starting to feel mechanical. You could see the not-so-invisible hand of the designer behind them moving the pieces around. It was almost like you could hear the actors say, "Yes, I have a problem. I'd like you to get the sword of +1 from the dungeon at the bandits in it." You could feel that coming across. And that was bad, because that's not what we wanted. We wanted to have the replayability that randomness gives you, but we still wanted it to feel immersive. We wanted it to feel natural and organic. We wanted to have our cake and eat it too. And it looked like we were not going to get to eat that cake. We were just going to get to have it. There was too much repetition. So with this event system and the story manager, what would happen is you'd get a quest, and say it was a reaction to dropping an object on the ground, and all these actors start fighting over it. Okay, that's cool. I walk 5 feet over to the right. I drop an object on the ground. Damn if it didn't have the exact same thing happen. And you started once again, feel the not-so-invisible hand of the designer behind there, because these actors were saying the exact same lines, going through the exact same motions, and that kind of repetition is bad. It broke the immersion that we were looking for. Too many bizarre combinations, So I drop this on the ground. The actors start to fight over it. So I decide to get into the fight. I kill one of them. The guy to my left who was talking about that suddenly says, "That was my brother," and he starts wanting to kill me. And you start getting things where these were colliding with each other. And so we had to try and keep them separate or manage the collisions so that they wouldn't cause those issues. At the end of the day, players don't want job quests. Now let me clarify that, because it's not that the job quest is bad. And when I say job quest, I mean the kind of thing where we go up to a guy in the Companions or in the Thieves Guild or whatever it might be and say, "Hey, do you have any work for me?" He says, "Yeah, why don't you go steal something from this house over there?" That's how we defined job quest, where I'm intentionally seeking out something that's a minor level activity that's themed towards the faction it's a part of, but it's not really progressing any story. There really isn't any heavy plot to it. But the example I just gave is something players would want. But what they didn't want was they didn't want the world filled with nothing but job quests. They didn't want only job quests. So the word only should be inserted in that line, to be honest. So we needed to figure out how to make the right kind of job quests. So we had to make some course corrections. Limit job quests to NPCs that it feels right for them. So not everybody in the world can give you a job quest. It has to feel like that's this guy's role in life. That's his purpose, or at least part of his purpose. So we restricted it to people that were pointed out explicitly that way in the faction quests. We restricted it to innkeepers, because they're the kind of people you go up to and say, "Hey, what's going on around town? Hey, there's a giant out there I'd like you to kill. Hey, I think I'll go do that." Things like that. And we also started to take some of the repetitiveness, well, not the repetitiveness, we started to take some of the, it would be repetitiveness, off of some of it by writing custom lines for different voice types. Now, I haven't talked about voice types yet because it's really not technically a part of Radiant's story, but it's something that we were able to put in that made a big difference. We gave all the actors a voice type. We had a wide range of voice types. And since that voice had to be recorded anyway and translated anyway, it was almost free for us to vary what the text was per voice type. So if I had something that could be done multiple times, say I drop the item on the ground and two guys start arguing over it, I could write different lines depending upon which two guys it is based on their voice type. I was going to be recording something anyway. I might as well make the line unique so that when I drop something over here and these two guys argue over it, when I turn to my right to 5 feet and drop an item there, the guys arguing over that are saying something different. So that started to get rid of the repetition. That started to make it feel like it was more natural. Yeah, they were both fighting over it, but it didn't feel like it was exactly the same because their reactions were different. They could be dramatically different. As long as the actual actions weren't different, I could write very, very different lines. And we had to expand the conditions limiting the quest. This was actually the hardest work to do. Each of the quests that I'm talking about had conditions that would allow it to trigger. And we had to get a lot more sophisticated with those conditions so that it had a better understanding of when's the right time to do this, when's not the right time to do this. We put in place a system for randomizing when you could do something, for waiting until something had not happened for a while before you do it again. Things like that, so that these things wouldn't happen too often. Because at one point in the game, you go to drop your stuff on the ground because you're trying to sort through it. Every time you drop something on the ground, somebody's coming over and reacting to it some way. So I dropped 5 things on the ground, all of a sudden half the town's over here and they're all fighting with each other and asking you, if you drop this, do you want it back? And it started to get really, really silly. So this became a significant amount of work trying to make sure that that didn't happen in a bad way. And this is the team that made all of this stuff. So this is the point at which, if you guys want to ask me questions, I'll be glad to entertain any questions. I hope I've been able to educate you a little bit about Radiant's story and the things that go into making some of the Radiant content that we have. Yes?
You mentioned the situation with Lucan and Camilla, and how if Lucan died, Camilla would take his place as the shopkeeper and the quest giver. What if you kill Camilla then?
Well, there's a point at which, if the player continues to do things, you have to get extreme responses. So he was asking is, if you kill Lucan, what happens if you then also kill Camilla? I mean, how far down this food chain do you go? You know, does some urchin in the street pick up the quest? Well, I didn't know those two, but, you know, I heard they wanted this back, and, you know, I figured what the heck, I'd help them out. So there comes a point where you either have to say somebody is essential or you failed the quest. And in that particular case, we chose fail the quest. So if you kill both of them, the quest fails. We put up a big quest fail banner. So you know you did that and you know it right away. And it's your choice. If you don't care, go for it. Hey, it's your game. We don't care. If you do care, well, then you have to go back to your last save game and then you can choose not to kill Camilla. So you can't have an infinite chain of these replaceable aliases. You have to decide when to cut that line. Yes?
First of all, Bruce, I want to thank you and the team at Bethesda for continuing to innovate role-playing game systems, because like these days, like so much is like the industry is so focused on making something a polished short experience, but you guys are continuing to make massive, sprawling experiences and a living, breathing world, and I truly appreciate that. And with regard to Radiant's story, what do you feel is the next step for Bethesda? So now that you've got the system where it generates quests, which is somewhat mechanical, but much more natural than before. And so the world just keeps going. What would like Elder Scrolls 6 have?
I think before Elder Scrolls 6, I think we have a party. There's a lot of high-fiving involved.
Okay.
To be honest, I don't have an answer for that question. The kinds of innovations that a lot of game developers make, they don't know what that innovation is going to be years ahead of time.
Fair enough.
So Elder Scrolls 6 is not going to be released next month. It's obviously would have its own development time whenever that comes around. So I have no idea. We'll think of something cool though. You can trust me on that.
Cool, thank you.
Cool. Hey, how you doing? So I absolutely love the sort of macro interactivity that you guys are going for, and I think it's a huge step in the pursuit of just more deep, opportunity-rich interactivity in games. And I feel like organic interactivity has some level of choice going on for both parties in the interactions, and I'm curious what sort of approaches you guys took to basically giving the AI that you're talking about, the Radiant stories, some level of choice. If it was just randomness, or if you actually built the system to be actively trying to surprise the player, which is kind of necessary to make it feel organic?
There were a number of things we did. The conditions that I talked about, that would try to tailor the quest to the situation better, make sure that it fit the circumstances more organically. The other thing that we did is we were able to do things like marking dungeons for when they had been cleared. You'll notice when you play the game, it says cleared next to a dungeon. So we could tell a quest, only pick a dungeon that has been cleared, has not been cleared, excuse me. So this would force you to go to a new place that you had not been before. Things like that.
And I guess sort of on top of that, you used the word reasonable when you were talking about how the world might be interacting to the player. And that struck me. I feel like a lot of what makes the world that surrounds us so real is that it isn't always reasonable, and it's surprising us. And that's sort of to tack on. Is there anything about that you guys...
Filmmakers talk about suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And you see it in novel writing as well. And there's an interesting thing that happens when you're looking at fiction or something outside of yourself, and when you're looking at the things that happen inside of yourself and in the real world. If a piece of space junk falls out of the sky and lands at my feet, I don't question that it happened. My senses tell me it's there. The only thing I struggle with is why. But I do not deny that it happened. If something completely out of context happens in a movie or a novel, you call BS on it. Your suspension of disbelief is at a different level in the real world than it is in a game. So our definition of reasonable needs to be that way also. The player expects there to be some justification, maybe he doesn't know quite yet, to the event that happens. Otherwise, he says, that game design was bad. Mm-hmm. And so we have a different burden of proof than you would have in the real world, like what you were citing with your example. Oh, this will be a good one. I'll have to run to get to you.
First off, have you ever taken an arrow to the knee?
Have I ever taken an arrow to the knee? Let me check here. No, I have never taken an arrow to the knee. Would you like to demonstrate one? I could bring you down here. We could try it out and see if you like it. Oh my, look at that. Lights in my eyes and all, right there in front.
So you say you can actually fail a quest, but there are certain points. Like if I were to go in, I'm always scared to do it because I'm scared of failing the quest. But when I go in and I'm like, what if I slaughtered all the graybeards? Which you can't complete the game if you do that. How did you prevent that from happening? I haven't done it out of fear of failing the game.
Well, you do have save games, so you could try it just for fun.
But if I killed them, the quest, I wouldn't be able to actually finish the game.
When
I'd have to go back.
the quest fails that we put up were for things that are self-contained, the side quests principally. And for things that have the faction lines involved or the main quest involved, we would make those characters not killable, or we would make sure there were aliases to replace them so that somebody else could fill that role, depending upon what it was. But at the end of the day, there is no way to get that quest to fail, because we want to make sure that you have the option to play through the main quest. So we'll keep that alive, even if we have to go to heroic measures to do so.
I'm going to go see what happens when I get home.
For the rest of you, we do have save games. Feel free to use them to try out crazy, kooky stuff. It's okay. The game will not blow up. We won't send secret ninjas to kill you in your sleep. Let's see if there's another question up top before I come back down here, as Dave so kindly pointed out. Okay, yes?
When you came about, this whole like Radiant Story concept and trying to brainstorm the ideas, but also implement them, what process and what tools did you use to manage all this? I guess many ideas and just iterations and implementations.
I don't know that this kind of thing is subject to process in the same way that a production schedule is, because this was all happening in the pre-production phase, which is a lot of ideas, a lot of writing things on paper and having people read them. So the process involved, the best thing I could say there is it's iteration. It's putting something down on paper, talking to people, finding out what's wrong with it, getting someone else's opinion, trying to crap detect what's going on in there and see if there's things that are not working. But it's just continually refining it. And at some point, you got to start putting stuff in the game, and then you really find out what you missed. behind you.
So at the end of the day, what would you say the balance was between the Radiant quests, Radiant story quests, were in terms of content versus the custom stuff you had to write, or the main story?
We ended up doing many more custom pieces. They felt better. We ended up finding some very sweet homes for the Radiant stuff. They tended to be best in the small experiences, and they tended to be best more in the job quests. Not that they don't exist in other places as well. I just cited Lucan and Camilla, which isn't a major side quest. But they tended to feel better when we used them in smaller ways because they tended to help give that extra organic feel to what was going on. So anytime when you do something in the world and you see a quick reaction, odds are that's a Radiant quest system taking place. Anytime you do something unexpected in a quest and you find there's a switch going on, like who's talking to you now, that's probably because the Radiant system is helping us along with that. But in terms of large, big things, I mean, you remember I had this slide up there where Todd was saying, maybe the whole main quest is a Radiant story. Yeah, that's not a good idea. He knew that when he said it, but one of the things that players expect from game developers is they want us to use our imagination and our creativity to create content that they can experience. If we pass the buck to a random system completely, they're getting what they're paying for in that case, which is a bad experience. We've not delivered on what they expect. They expect us to come up with a cool story that they haven't experienced before, and we want to deliver that.
Do you feel that the Radiant quest system allowed you to become more ambitious with the quests that are like the main side stories? Like say, what happens in Markarth, how the result of one of the major side quests basically ends up with this huge amount of chaos in the city. Do you think you would have not approached that if you didn't have a system to generate smaller quests?
Probably not. We would have done less of it. And one of the things that the Radiant quest system allowed us to do was produce more content at a higher quality level than we could have produced without it. So to do that quest the right way, to imitate it the way it is now, but without the Radiant quest system, would have taken more development time. Something else would have had to fall by the wayside. Something else would not have ended up in the game as a result. So it was definitely a big bonus for us.
Was there anything that you wanted to accomplish with the Radiant system that you weren't able to get working?
It didn't remodel my bathroom. Didn't pick my kids up from school. Anything that we didn't want to? That's hard to say because it really developed and changed so much over time as we realized what was good and what was bad that we kind of just automatically set aside some of the things we had hoped it would do by the time it got to the end of what it was. I think for me, it would have been cooler if we had been able to do more relationship-oriented stuff with people that you get to be your friends and then things happen because of your friends, and there's some of that in the game, but it's not as expansive as it maybe could have been. You can't do everything. Our game director is very fond of saying that you can do anything, you can't do everything. So you have to make choices. That was a choice that we made. Let's not do that. These things are working out really well. We'll do that instead.
So you obviously accomplished the task of Radiant Story in one form or another, but when Todd comes to you and says this new crazy idea that has never been done before, what kind of boundaries do you as designers set for yourselves? Like, if after 3 months we don't have this working, we're going to scrap it and go with something else?
It never actually comes up. When he comes to us and says, "I've got this crazy thing I want you to do," we start working on things. You start looking at it in very short increments of time, which allows you to figure out that something's not working before 3 months have gone by. And you make immediate course corrections, and you end up leaving little pieces behind, like some of the relationship stuff I was talking about a little while before. Well, that was later in the process. So you can't wait until you get to that stage. You have to be looking at things constantly and making that evaluation constantly, and then you don't get into that situation. There's one over here somewhere.
I was wondering if there was a super awesome, cool feature you said, oh, we don't have the tech for that, we don't have the time for that. And what was it? What was the idea? What was this amazing
We
thing?
put a heck of a lot into that game. You want more? There's something we missed? You know, dragons with ice cream cones. You know, there weren't. Damn it! No dragons with ice cream cones. I'm going to duck that question. If there was something, we may be considering it for a future project. We put an awful lot of stuff into our games. I like to call us the kings of content, and I think in a lot of ways that's true. We pack so much into the games that, you know, if you want more, wait till the next game. We'll give you more in that one. Passing it all the way down there. I want only people in the middle here to ask questions from now on. So these microphone guys have to work hard.
Okay. So I was curious, kind of the opposite to one of the previous questions, whether if there was some features that you had to cut out from the Radiant system, were there any emergent behaviors that resulted or something completely unexpected? Do you have any interesting anecdotes on that?
One of the fun ones actually is kind of related to what was happening here. Todd was giving a demonstration to somebody at some point, and so he wanted to drop an object on the ground so that you could look at the model, because the part of the interface so that you look at the model in the inventory system wasn't up and running then. So he dropped an item on the ground, and an NPC came running over, picked up, and said, "You dropped this." Gave it right back to him. It was like, damn it, and walked over here and dropped it, and somebody did the same thing, because we didn't have the conditionalized right, so he was having a really hard time dropping things on the ground and getting to stay there so he could show what the object looked like outside of holding his hand. We've had situations where actors run way off screen to go get weapons and come back like an hour later when it's too late to use them. You know, things like that. Lots of little amusing things of that nature. So I think we had things like trolls running away from bunnies at one point. So that was more combat AI oriented than it was Radiant story, quite frankly. But yes.
One of the things that's always fun to do in Elder Scrolls games. Thank you. One of the things that's always fun to do in Elder Scrolls games is be a high-ranking member of the Imperial Legion and also a high-ranking member in the Thieves Guild. How does Radiant Story deal with that sort of very, very stark conflict?
I don't know that I'd agree that's a stark conflict. It would appear that way on the surface, but you hear stories all the time about you know, officers of the law who are corrupt. Just imagine yourself as one of them. You know, you're on the take. So in cases like that, that's some of the collisions that I was talking about. There's stuff that you can just separate and let the player tell the fiction that at one point he's really not one thing, and at the other point he's really not the other. And that's kind of the tack that we took there. When you get the Thieves Guild thing, it just doesn't even pay attention to the fact that you're part of the Imperial forces or the Stormcloak forces. So that turned out to be the more functional thing there. In a game like ours, typically the player is playing along one line, and he knows that other stuff is out there, but he's willing to set it aside. He knows he's following all these tracks simultaneously. So we allow that to proceed by not letting them collide. Okay. My minder here is telling me you have a time limit, so I'm going to go way in the back up there because it's fun to watch the microphone guys run. Run, microphone guy, run!
Hi. Do you think we'll ever be at a point where the procedural story system like Radiant AI or Radiant Story will be used for the main quest or anything that has very cool set pieces?
Actually, that's something that I was going to touch on during the slideshow, so thank you for bringing that up. Radiant Story is a tool. That is all it is. All of these things are tools. They are methods to get work done and to achieve a result. You can use a tool well, you can use a tool poorly, but at the end of the day, it's a tool. And the tool will not make content for you. You are the only guys who can make content. The development team has to decide this is good content, this is bad content, and this tool will allow me to build it or not build it. So if I were to hazard a guess to your question, I would say no. That the storytelling aspect is a uniquely human endeavor that, at least in my lifetime and likely in all of yours, we will not have game consoles doing. That's a highly sophisticated process they're just not capable of. Maybe someday we'll get people who can put together some really sophisticated things that build halfway decent stories that way. But to completely set it free, no. That's what people are for. That's who builds good stories. Let me take one more, or you want me to call it? One more. Okay. You had your hand up before.
What exactly did you learn in the process of developing Skyrim that you may put forward into the next Elder Scrolls game and so on and so forth?
A lot of the stuff that I put up there. A lot of the stuff about randomly created content. There's a lot of lessons learned that I described here about things where you can go too far. Going too far is necessary, but you have to know when you did it. Certain things that players really do want or don't want, despite what they say they want. Sometimes there's a collision there between what they say and what they really like. So a lot of the stuff that I put up on the slides, I would actually put into that category of things that we'll take forward into future projects. Okay, thank you all very much, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks for putting up with my presentation.